Good morning, everybody. We're really excited to be here today to share our story and our experience of working on the Lima Pan American and Para-Pan American Games. We're going to share with you, our experiences of how our team came together and how our relationship with the Peruvian government came together to form a government-to-government arrangement. We're going to go through the challenges and strategies we had to overcome, one of them being implementing NEC in a new region, in a new country, in a non-English speaking region, and then some lessons learned, so the all-important lessons learned. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to take us through the history.
Thanks. This one. Okay, the history. They were awarded the Games back in 2013 and started thinking about their procurement process. But in the meantime, there was a bit of a scandal brewing in South America. There was a large Brazilian contractor called Odebrecht, who was one of the largest contractors in South America, and with a whiff of corruption about them. And in 2014, 2015, they were under serious investigation for corruption involving bribes of $2 billion, either dollars or pounds, it doesn't really matter, but it was very large indeed. And they were accused of paying these bribes to politicians and CEOs, and unfortunately for Peru, they were also bidding, or potentially bidding, some of the packages of work on the Lima 2019 project. So this kind of put the Peruvians and the Lima 2019 in a bit of a pickle, and it basically paralyzed them for about 18 months. Nothing really happened at all, and the project just got delayed and it looked in serious doubt. So they decided to invite some international help, and they went to a select number of countries to invite some help to support them and advise them on how to bring this thing back on track. And in particular, they went to the Canadians because of their previous experience at Toronto, and they came to the UK, which has a great track record on delivering sporting events. So they invited the UK or these other countries to bid at the end of 2016, and we put a bid in collectively in March. The bid was put together by Arup, MACE and Global. And the core themes that we thought would help us win the bid were, in particular, obviously capability. The team had tremendous capabilities, but the thing that we thought would get us over the line was collaborative working and transparency, because they were the two big things that seemed to be missing out in Lima up to that point. And so eventually the agreement was signed in April 2017, which is only barely just over 2 years ago, I suppose, at which point the Lima 2019 Organizing Committee were approximately 18 months to 2 years behind where they should have been. So obviously that was a tremendous challenge. The team that was put together for this was principally MACE to advise on procurement, delivery assurance and the PMO services. Arup, I'm actually from Arup, not MACE as it happens, on the design assurance and technical assurance, and Global, who have particular experience in operations and the sort of service levels that are required and what goes into actually operating the venues when they're collectively operating for the games themselves. Oops. And so the scope of the delivery was, our overarching scope, if you like, is just support and advise. We don't actually do any design, and we take no responsibility, if you like. All the contracts are letters D and B, but we're there to offer support and advice from our previous experience, in particular on the technical side, coming from ourselves, and from MACE on the program side and delivery. I'll hand over to Frank now, who will take you through the next stage.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Just to echo Nisha's points, I'm very excited to be here today to tell the story of how the NEC contract has and can be introduced into a new region. To contextualize that, we'll talk about the scope, the challenges, and the thinking behind, and how the idea of introducing NEC to South America landed, and what were the ideas, what was it that inspired the clients and those people that we had to influence. So, firstly, the scope essentially was, after the government-to-government deal was signed, the challenge really was the need to deliver 19 venues and an athletes' village. The budget they had was $500 million. If you were to equate that to a UK context, it's about £700 million, as certain construction costs are quite cheap there. It had an 18-month time frame from pretty much standing start to commission, and above all, it had a immovable deadline. So, and that's a great thing about major events, is that they have a movable deadline, and that does prompt decision making, and it prompts people really analysing what's the best way to go about this. So the opening ceremony is actually on the 26th of July this year, so we've 40 odd days to go until that opens. So the areas of challenge, just to give you a quick overview what the areas of challenge were. There were internal and external. Internal, obviously, program was a massive challenge. The design maturity was in a pretty poor stage. It needed help. The organisation, very often in a major event, it's a sunset organisation. They're just about getting themselves together and have to build up to a large crew. So therefore, the structures we'd have in traditional organisations are not there. The market response was very poor, and Andrew alluded to the car wash scandal and the impact that had. But also, historically, the procurement process in this country was in a very poor state. It would take 18 months to procure a contractor. It was backed up by corruption and interference, and very much a master-servant arrangement between the contractor and the client. And that, again, was underpinned by bureaucracy and the tendency for pretty much every project to go to some form of arbitration or litigation. The external context was, as Andrew said, it was the mistrust around the whole car wash scandal and what had gone on the years beforehand. Projects constantly in delay, public projects at that, I add, and very low interest from the market. So it needed something different. It's worth saying that NEC wasn't mandated by the UK government. What we would like to do now is actually explain how we came to be and how the circumstances actually landed and suited the NEC form of contract. So what were our drivers? Andrew initially explained our bid strategy along with Arup and 4Global. It needed speed, it needed innovation, it needed value. We had, obviously, value for money is an important one, but more importantly was legacy. And that was one of the bid strategies that landed. We said it was more than just delivering a games. I mean, the legacy from London actually was the confidence that London 2012 gave to our industry. And of course, NEC was central to that. In this case, it was not just about delivering the games, but actually leaving a legacy behind of what a good delivery model might be. And some of the thinking and some of the words in quotation will be very familiar to the people in this room. But they were the words that we used, and actually they landed pretty much all of the time when we spoke to the clients and stakeholders. So what was the route to NEC? You normally go through a delivery strategy, begin with the end in mind. It's how we would normally approach a delivery strategy. Obviously, that's underpinned then by what your contracting strategy is, and procurement process was. Our role in Lima 2019 was actually to act as the procurement agent. We literally did all the procurement away from the Peruvian team. That helped them, and it also helped us. And we used pretty much the practices, the OJU principles that we use in this country. Taking the status and taking the appraisal of the various options of procurement, we landed on a management contract approach. But of course, there are many different types and forms of management contract. The one that we proposed was based on the NEC Option F. Why NEC Option F? I think not only is the principles of the NEC in terms of simple to use, plain English, based on positive behaviours, delivery-focused behaviours, and also the whole concept of collaboration. So you have your toolkit in NEC, yeah, and you have your processes, very strong on processes, but actually it has a certain aurora about it as well too. So when we spoke about changing a new way of delivery where both the contractor and the client have equal status, this is against a backdrop where, you know, it's a master-servant scenario, and very often the clients would go roughshod over the contract in their dealings with the contractors. Of course, that's during the execution phase, and of course when the contract is finished, the lawyers get involved and it goes the other way. So this actually appealed to a lot of people, and people very much bought into the idea of NEC. In fact, they don't call it NEC, they call it NEC. And the other thing was we were dealing with a lot of engineers, and actually they actually bought into the idea of a contract written by engineers for engineers. What were the benefits of using NEC? Very, very positive. In fact, it was better than what we expected. The enthusiasm was very positive. During our roadshows and market engagement, we realized there was a great interest in not only national but international companies to get involved in these infrastructure projects, of which there were 5 main contracts. Enabling innovation, they liked the idea of that. Typically, they're very prescriptive traditional contracts. The innovation being brought in from the design and build element, and even asking for innovation proposals in the procurement phase. The early contractor design element, the ability for our partners Arup actually to work with them to get very sustainable, optimized and world-class and world standard class venues. And of course the risk share, because normally the risk is always passed down to the contractor in spades. In this case, the management contract, as we know, the client takes on board a lot of risk, and that obviously attracted the market. The client will always be an element, a certain way, uncomfortable with that, but they knew that their priority at that point was time. I'm going to hand over to Andrew for a minute now. We'll talk a little bit about the design technical assurance.
Thanks. Yeah, they were all design and build contracts, and so we just set the contractors, and we were dealing with 4 separate contractors. One contractor won 2 packages, and we set them the challenge of giving us information in 3 hits. We wanted an initial basis of design document, which set out how their approach to designing, what seismic codes they were going to use, what wind codes, trying to introduce best international practice if we could. We had a submission at scheme design stage, and then we had a further submission at IFC, Information for Construction stage, which was split to allow some early packages to be submitted early, such as foundations. And overall, we ended up reviewing something like 20,000 drawings at the end, and we raised something like 6,500 comments, of which most have been answered, but not all.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, we just want to take you through some of the benefits just as a part of the case study. Again, the idea being that there's a legacy opportunity, what's been delivered here, and how you can change behaviours through demonstrating success. And that's a long road to follow, but I actually think that it's actually hit the ground running, and it's in a good place, and I think there's great opportunities to further grow the NEC contract in Peru and indeed South America. So this is the Athletes Village in October 2017, and this is it 18 months later. It's 1,096 units. The contractor brought a huge amount of innovation, worked very closely with Arups to optimize the design and optimize the construction methodology. Again, this is the Aquatic Centre, which is part of the Videna complex, of which there's 6 other venues. Again, that was August 2018, that's less than a year ago. That's it a few weeks ago, and I was in it a few weeks ago myself, and it's as good as any aquatic centre you'll go anywhere in the world. You know, it's as good as London without the curves. And without the bill as well, too. That's the Velodrome. And essentially, the bottom line is that the market has taken on board NEC, the concept, the idea, the processes of NEC with great enthusiasm. Even the clients have. A lot of the public sector organisations are very keen to learn about NEC. We spend a lot of time speaking to them about NEC, but not just NEC, but how the whole design assurance process works, how they can add benefits, but also the Program Management Office tools and the Program Management Office, which was part of our scope as well too. And an important point we're trying, and one of the interesting things was the worked quite well in these contracts was the escalation process and the appointment of a DAB, dispute avoidance panel, within the process. Very often, as I said earlier, pretty much all of the contracts in this region go to litigation, arbitration, etc. In this case, they have used the DAB process, and at this point, and we've delivered, we're about 98% complete in all the venues. Some are delivered. There's a few smaller venues outstanding. We'll be finished in the next few weeks. But at this point, there are no disputes in process. That's not to say there won't be, but the likelihood is that the dispute level will be very, very low. And I think that's a legacy that we can generate future traction with the NEC is about the dispute. And I think that's one of the great benefits of NEC is dispute avoidance. I will hand over you to Nisha now, who will talk about some of the lessons learned. Thank you.
So I think Frank's covered quite a lot of the points, but at this point in the project where we're 40 days away, I think, from the opening ceremony, I think we're very happy in the route that we chose with NEC and the Option F contract. It was no mean feat to introduce a new form of contract to a new country that had never used this type of contract before, and also the management form of contract. So both aspects were very, very new. And there was a lot of nervousness and trepidation as we were going into it. So one of the key things that we did, obviously, through learning and training the supply chain, was we held joint training sessions with the client and the contractor in the same room, so that any of those initial queries and points of nervousness could be addressed in the room through lots of scenarios. So that really helped with going into contract, making sure that our supply chain were as well equipped as they could be. They actually all did a lot of their own research as well, so bought all the training materials and did a lot of in-house training and coaching themselves. So as Frank said, given that 85% of construction projects in Peru do go to arbitration, it was a step change in how we were managing contracts and construction management in general. So fortunately, NEC gave us the anchors for collaborative working, which was something that we wanted to heavily pursue. And public sector procurement in general in Peru, as Frank mentioned, was always anticipated as very onerous, and the legal framework in Peru doesn't lend well to procurement, and public procurement particularly as well. So some of the lessons learned through implementation, the core thing that we had to get over at the beginning was the trust element. Before we got into explaining anything to do with the NEC, anything to do with how the contract worked, we spent many, many sessions just talking about trust and what trust meant to both our client and the supply chain. Once we were able to start having those frank conversations, the training and the information that we gave them on how the contract worked became a lot easier. Behaviours started to change quite quickly, but I think we still had some way to go in those early few days. And as Frank said, the power of a hard deadline. So I think the commitment from everybody that we wanted to see success, it was a nationally significant project, was felt by the whole team. So when we were introducing this new style of working with a new style of contract, there was that real willingness to make it successful. So some of the positive lessons, I think engagement really, really helped. And the lovely things that we like about NEC in its simplicity to use couldn't have helped us more, where we were often dealing with people who English wasn't their first language, and we were having to do translations. So interpretation and making sure that people understood the contract and what we were trying to achieve was a challenge, but we were able to get a good traction with it, and embracing those NEC principles. So early warnings were a very, very foreign concept to our supply chain. And I remember I was talking to one of the project managers a few weeks ago, and he was explaining to me how initially they felt that it was a huge sign of weakness to put in early warnings. It wasn't part of the culture of how they worked and putting in an early warning was showing weakness to the client and their inability to deal with their own problems and having to ask for help. So that was a big step change in culture, where we're now in a stage where early warnings are free-flowing, the contractors are very confident in issuing them and dealing with issues in real time rather than saving them all up to the end and waiting for those issues to arise has been a massive, massive step change in how Peruvian construction projects run. As Frank mentioned, Disputes Avoidance Board. So the Peruvian legal framework allows for personal liability rather than corporate liability if there is an issue in a construction project. So having a Disputes Avoidance Board meant that issues could be quickly kicked up and escalated, meaning that decision-making could happen and in a free-flowing manner and allow work to continue. So this was also a big change from what they were used to. They were used to stopping, downing tools, getting bogged down in issues, and then decisions not being free-flowing. And then commercial closeout. So we're just in the throes of our commercial closeout process. It's been hugely welcomed, which we've been quite surprised with, because there hasn't ever been a formal process for closing out contracts. So we are at the moment looking at closing everything out by the end of September. So some of the challenges, I mean, overall, it has been a very positive experience, but it has been really hard. So very new contract and implementing the right team infrastructure was a difficult concept to get across as well. So the project manager and his delegated responsibility has been a difficult challenge to get the Lima 2019 team to get on board with fully. So we would like to have gone further with making sure that governance and delegated authority aligned with the contract and the contract principles. I think this has been our first attempt, and we've learned some lessons in how we would structure governance going forward to make sure it aligns very well with the contract. And then also maintaining the core principles. We just talked about amending the contract. There were amendments in the Z clauses of the contract, but we did try very hard to make sure that the core integrity of NEC was maintained, and for the most part it was. There were some changes around payment and financial principles. However, I think through interpretation and continued use of the contract, we'll be able to encourage future contracts to let go of those sorts of amendments. And then reporting, so getting better information through the supply chain. So when we started, reporting and data collection and payments and all of those processes that we're very, very familiar with were slow to get going, but as soon as they were understood, really helped pave the way. And hopefully in our closeout process, we're going to see the benefit of that. So I'm just going to end on a video of our client who's got a few comments on this.
My name is Carlos Neuhaus, and I'm in charge of delivering the Pan Am Games of Lima 2019. I'm the executive director of the project and also the president of the organizing committee. When we got into the games, I had very clear that we need to have a PMO and somebody that will help us in delivering the games. One of the things we find out is that these have to be through G2G contract. And the Department of International Trade proposed us companies to work with. One of those was MACE. The good thing is that we have put together a team from different origins, and it's called Lima 2019. The Lima team, which was a new team with your team from Europe. The assembly between these two teams has been very good, and people from different cultures have been able to work together and produce these games. First of all, they have helped us delivering on time. It's important to mention also is that the system of working with MACE and these NEC contracts are making people to see these new forms of contracting construction are a very expedited way of doing things. Especially for a country that we had millions or billions of dollars that are stuck because the contracting procedures are not agile and they don't go so fluently. This has been a great opportunity, and our authorities in Peru are looking for different ways of constructing. Now we are almost finishing this phase, and we're entering into the operational aspects. And I think MACE have done a great job. The success of the games are a must. It will mean a great opportunity for young people to look at sports. If people that have gone through sports, I think they are much more prepared to the challenges that they will face.
So we do tell them it's NEC at every opportunity, but net contracting has kind of stuck. But thanks very much.
Thank you.